Trans Day of Visibility, everybody. Does it work, Kaylee?
It is. And there. I've just started recording so we can actually record it because we have a lot of people asking if it's recorded. And it should stay on our Instagram, but like I also want to make sure that we have a copy. Yeah. So welcome everyone to Trans Day of Visibility, the much happier trans celebration than the one in November, which is Trans Day of Remembrance. So I'm glad that everyone's here. Been looking forward to this, and especially happy to be doing this with Reap and stuff. Yeah.
Awesome.
Anyways, I'm Kaylee. I work at the Center for Prophetic Imagination, but I also work with Reap every once in a while because I'm one of the plaintiffs on the case that they are, I don't know what, holding, supporting, I don't know. Language isn't working for me. Yeah. Is that the appeal process now?
What's that?
I just said it's at the appeal process right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It totally is.
Yeah, my pronouns are she, her. So, and then I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Chloe, you want to go?
Yeah. My name is Chloe. I am with Reap. I do social media for Reap. And so I'm excited to be here and listening and learning and trying to participate where I can. I use she, they pronouns. And yeah, I'll give it back to Erin.
Cool. My name's Erin Green. My pronouns are she, they. I work for Reap, and I'm the campus and alumni organizer for them. And just a little like background academically, because I think it's apropos for what we're talking about today. I have a biblical studies degree, a bachelor's degree in biblical studies, and an MDiv from San Francisco Theological Seminary. And Kaylee has amazing credentials, and so does Chloe in this topic. Seminarians, former seminarians. So yeah, happy to be here celebrating Trans Day of Visibility, and really excited about this conversation that we're going to have because honestly, it's not held enough.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that there's definitely not, I mean, honestly, the study in queer theology is low, and then even for trans theology, it's even lower. And so there's really not that much of a discussion that I feel like there's not much of a discussion that's happening necessarily on like the organizational, maybe individual level. Like it's happening in seminaries if you're at a progressive seminary.
Right.
Because like I graduated from United Theological Seminary of Twin Cities, which is like hyper progressive, but to get there I had to get expelled from a very conservative seminary who wasn't talking about queer theology. In fact, any theology that wasn't white cishet theology wasn't taught. So,
yeah, absolutely. And it's, I mean, basically what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that it's not accessible to folks who are outside of progressive seminaries. Or
yeah, I mean, it's really not.
Yeah. Which is really makes it really difficult for folks who want to learn that information or be educated in it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, for tonight, that's kind of our plan, is to talk about like what does the Bible actually say about trans people? Yeah. What does it say about solidarity, and what does church history tell us about gender expansive people within like history? Because why aren't there trans people in like Christian history and stuff like that? And then we're going to finish with like ways that churches and organizations and individuals can join in solidarity, because a lot of times organizations especially, like they're very strong on being affirming, but like affirming should really be that first step. Like letting queer people into your spaces should be the starting point. We really need to start pushing towards like actual solidarity where we are being intentional and not passive, like being an active participant in like what is going on in our world. Because honestly, trans people, queer people, like we're facing quite a lot, and
Yeah.
it's rough. Like it's really rough out there. So yeah, that's a layout for this broadcast. Drop your questions, because that's what we're here for. Like any questions that you have that you haven't been able to ask, you have asked but didn't like the answer, or whatever, just drop them. We're going to be paying attention to all of that, and we'll be able to answer some of your questions on the fly.
Yeah. And I'll monitor those questions, so hopefully I don't miss anything, but I'm keeping my eye on the feed here to see what folks will be asking like during the discussion. So I'm here for that. I'm here for you every week. So I have a question for you, Kaylee. I mean, besides getting into the biblical content, like I want to hear from your expertise, like about gender binaries in the Bible and Genesis and all the things that I know but like I think this is an important thing to talk about right off the bat. Is why is this important, not just for folks who might have interest in the biblical text, but for people who have left the church, who might have no interest in the biblical text, who are atheist or agnostic. Why is this such a relevant conversation? And, despite it being about the Bible or about religion or Christianity and that influence in our culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the question, is like, first of all, like, why is it important? Because I kind of feel like you have two questions there. Like, why is it important? And then, like, specifically, let's talk about the binaries within the Bible. It's important because whether or not people watching this are Christian or not, they were raised evangelical, still are, were never Christian. The truth of the matter is there are policies being made and passed that are relying on an evangelical understanding of a gender binary. And to be able to speak to that, to be able to actually recognize what is being said, what is being believed, is going to allow us to, at minimum, understand the language they're using, but at the same time be able to understand like why maybe that's not the only way to understand things, especially within the scripture. And that's really, whenever we're able to come with knowledge to say that, no, there's another way to understand this, like it really does cut at a lot of the power structures that are upheld, that rely on this idea that they get to control what's believed, get to control the interpretation, get to be the ones that have the right understanding. And to say, no, you're actually not the ones that have truth in this, is actually to subvert a lot of the power that they hold. So I think it's really important to actually ask these questions, to understand like why, like where some understandings are coming from, and yeah, just it's important. It's important.
Yeah, totally. That makes so much sense. I mean, so much of our culture, policies, laws are influenced by the biblical text, by ideas of Christianity, by church tradition, whether we like it or not, and that doesn't make it okay. That doesn't make that right or true or good. Yeah. So that's super helpful.
But yeah, specifically about gender binaries, I mean, the biggest thing that I get online all the time is people pointing to Genesis 1, which, kind of makes sense. Like, it's the creation. That's what people want to point to, because they want to talk about how the universe is made and biology, and people really want to have this very simplistic like kindergarten understanding of, boys have penises, girls have vaginas, and then that's it.
Yeah.
But we live in a world that is so much more complex than like what can be understood at a kindergarten level. So like let's actually talk about this and look at it. But yeah, Genesis 1, is really like that go-to scripture that people like to use to be like, you see, God created a binary. Like it's right there in scripture. God places God's image on humans, male and female. Like that's it. Male and female, two fixed categories. The problem is like that is the most inconsistent reading of Genesis 1 because like we have to understand like there's no verses in the original text, right? Like those were added much later so we can like reference verses.
Right.
Like we're meant to actually read these within like the entirety of the passage. And that is that's significant because that means that we have to interpret a passage through the same lens in the entirety. And if we look at gender binaries as a fixed category, then we have to look at all the categories in Genesis 1 as fixed categories, which just, it doesn't break down. I mean, it breaks down. It doesn't hold up. And so like specifically, like there's a separation between day and night, which shouldn't exclude dawn or dusk or, you know, it like where does light come from matches? Like that's not part of the light discussion. Like you have the separation of waters and that with like that leaves out swamps. There's, you know, the creation of the heavenly bodies and there's like black holes that people didn't even know about. There's frogs that live in the water until they grow up and they transform and they live on land. Like those are two different categories. And then my favorite, the emu, which is a bird, so it should fit into like the animals of the air, but it doesn't fly, so it's like a land creature, but it ended up being domesticated at some point in time, so now it's part of cattle. And so like our emu is like the example of like just an example of an abomination towards God because they don't fit into any specific category. And like
that's a great point. I've never heard that. That's awesome.
And there's like so much more. Like, what do you do with algae? Like, according to the biblical text, plants only live on the land, right? Like, what do you do with a plant that literally lives like in the water itself? Like, it doesn't fit into a category. And you know what? We're completely okay with it. Like, nobody's going around thinking, hey, algae is outside of the created order. It's an abomination. Like, no one's doing that. So the idea that we come to like the last passage or the last section of this passage and say, oh, now we're going to be like, it's a fixed category that we're going to just hold to, and there's not going to be any like cross between it or like anything that exists out of it is like that's breaking biblical exegesis class day one. Like you've got to read consistently, and if we're going to read consistently, it does not allow for a gender binary to be this idea of something that's held to. It's just not there. And I think like me personally, I think that's super important because like it's in the context of the image of God being placed on humanity. And when we look at it, it's actually not placed on them. It's not placed on the man and the woman or whatever. It's literally placed on humanity as a whole. And a lot of times we think of the image of God as something that each individual person has, and that's actually not true. The image of God is the singularity of all humanity that encompasses the image of God. So to exclude people from that image because they don't line up with your very broken interpretation is literally to like make an image of God in your own image, because it takes the entirety of humanity to make the image of God. So like you just can't do this. Like you should not be doing this.
Wow. That's like the way you articulated that was pretty mind-blowing to me, because I've thought about it in those senses, but like the way you just said it, like it's not about, or it takes all of us to
Mm-hmm.
manifest the Imago Dei, you know, and none of us are, like you said, none of us are excluded from that,
Mm-hmm.
from that at all. I mean, period.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, gender binaries. And something that I remember too being taught in seminary and like, you know, in biblical study, in my studies, is that the point of, I think, a text like Genesis 1 and even Genesis 2, because and that's another thing we haven't even talked about, is how different the creation narratives are from Genesis 1 to Genesis 2. They're not the same. They're two different creation stories, but it's a way of for those people, for that civilization, to explain the way they thought the world worked around them, or whoever the biblical authors were. The purpose of it was to explain why they thought the world functioned the way it did. And they did not have access to the kinds of resources that we do. They don't have the kinds of access to science or technology or even, you know, a vast geography, maps, things like that. So those things have to be accounted for in that, I think, in that discussion as well, is just that ancient perspective that doesn't necessarily have the motive to exclude something intentionally, but to just explain how something functions instead, and not necessarily give all of the information about it.
Yeah. I mean, in essence, what you're saying is we're trying to force it to answer questions that it had no intention of ever answering. And I mean, that's significant because, like, what is the point of Genesis 1? The point is to understand functionality. So with like the creation of light and dark, it's not actually light and dark. It's literally the creation of day and night. It's a time frame. The creation of things in the sky is to understand like direction, understand crops. Like the water receding has a lot to do with like whenever rivers would flood and then they would recede and then it was time to plant crops. Like so much of this narrative is focused on what was important to them and how things function. So whenever we get to gender binaries, we have to understand like their questions weren't, oh, how many genders are there? No, like what they actually cared about when it came to gender and sexuality was literally whose lineage do we follow? Like that's literally the point. Like they don't actually care what people do with their genitals. They care like who's the father of a child, because that's the connection between family structures, is how unity between different families were made and broken if there was something that happened between a married person. Like that was what was important to them, not like gender. Like gender wasn't the question whenever they were writing this. And I think that's important to understand, because Genesis doesn't even hold a gender binary throughout the entirety of the book. And do you want me to jump into that, or you want to stay on the beginning?
Just go for it. And also just want to remind folks, you can drop your questions. Rachel, by the way, I see you in there dropping lots of truth bombs into the text, so we see you and appreciate that. Our friend Rachel, Queer in Faith there. But yeah, drop your questions in there if y'all want to participate in this discussion. Well, Kaylee's here to answer your questions, and yeah, let's talk about all the things.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like gender binaries are not at all a thing in the book of Genesis. Like there are stories throughout Genesis that do indicate like there are gender non-conforming people that still probably identify as their gender. But then there's the story of Joseph that is like this entire story that is about a trans person that we've missed because of translations and interpretations that don't want to see it. But the story of Joseph recognizes the femininity of this person, like from the beginning all the way to the end. I mean, I think a lot of people have heard, because I know Middle Church did a couple videos on this before, and some other people, like Joseph's coat of many colors is defined in 2 Samuel 13, I want to say. I don't have a Bible in front of me.
We should all know the answer to this, but we don't, and that's okay.
Yeah. There are a lot of chapters in the Bible, and I don't know all of them.
There are so many chapters in the Bible.
There are. But yeah, like the term that's used for Joseph's clothing is defined in 2 Samuel as literally the garment that the daughters of the kings of old wore, the virgin daughters of the kings of old wore, specifically virgin daughters. And that's significant because, like, all these people are like, we should have the Bible interpret itself. All right, well, let's start here. We'll let the Bible interpret itself. And,
yeah.
So, like, the only understanding that we have of this term, because it's not used anywhere else, it's used in these two places. One of them literally defines it. Like, that generally means that you go with that definition. So the best definition of what Joseph wore was clothing indicating their virginity as a daughter of a local leader, because the word malek does just mean leader. It can mean king, but like it's used for so many different rulers.
Right.
It doesn't have to. But what is more significant, I think, is like Joseph is only they're the third generation from Abraham, right? Mm-hmm. And we read in the text that Abraham came from Ur, which is this city that it's an ancient, even by that time, is an ancient city. Like, it existed,
right,
starting in 4000 BCE. So it's like it was already an ancient city. They literally had they literally had the worship of the goddess Inanna, who was actually a trans god, but they had festivals and they had priests and priestesses that were used to worship this goddess that were trans, and they dressed the trans women in these garments, especially with like these long flowy garments, as a symbol that they were these what's called gala, and they were priests and priestesses for this culture. The fact that Joseph is given this outfit by their father is incredibly significant, because it lines up culturally with that area's understanding of trans people and what you do to affirm that person's gender. Like, this is literally the oldest story of a father affirming the transness of his kid. Like, there's no other story I know of that has this.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's significant, right? Like,
yeah, that's massive. Like, in all the work that I've done and the studying that I've done, I have never heard that translation or that hermeneutic from the text. It's important. It's important that people know this, because it does, it changes the entire conversation, right?
Uh-huh.
It changes the focus. And I think that's what's so difficult for people, because they're so used to traditional readings of the text or interpretations of the text. But when we tell them, actually, something different is happening here, something much different And the best way I can describe it is, I'll do this real fast because I don't want to like eat up any of Kaylee's time on this. But one of my professors made us, or spoke out loud to us the story of Humpty Dumpty. And we were supposed to close our eyes. And then our professor said, you know, who is Humpty Dumpty? And everybody in the room said, Humpty Dumpty's an egg. And our professor was like, well, it never says that in the text. It never tells us that Humpty Dumpty was an egg. But you have been, because you've grown up and it's embedded and programmed in your mind, and nursery rhymes and whatever and pictures, that's the tradition of the story, but that's not the truth. Humpty Dumpty wasn't an egg at all. You can Google what Humpty Dumpty actually was, but it just points to what Kaylee was saying, that you have a traditional rendering of the text, usually by white cis hetero men, and and then you have this. So this is just much better, and it's accurate.
I mean, even more than just like white cis, how often do we learn stories beyond what we were taught, like in Sunday school as a child? Like, we're kind of taught these texts at a very like young age, and like that's kind of the understanding that we carry through our adulthood, and we don't dive back into it later unless you're in seminary, you're studying theology, and then that's when you start to unpack and be like, whoa, maybe how I understood this as a 6-year-old is not the same way that I understand this now.
Exactly. And so Kaylee, are you going to publish any of this? Because this needs to
I'm wanting to.
Okay.
I haven't got there yet. It is on my list of things to do. But yes, I do plan on publishing this. I mean, honestly, that's just the tip of the story with Joseph, because like it says, especially with like translations, it says that Israel loved Joseph more, and in the English text it says more than his other sons, even though the word other isn't there in the Hebrew. It's literally Israel loved Joseph more than his sons. But we throw other in there just because, you know, we can't have a trans person in the scripture.
That's so interesting. Wow, I'm like blown away by this. Somebody did ask a question, and I need to make sure that I catch it. Rachel Talk Books. What was the name of the trans god again?
That was Inanna. Later, Inana, kind of like banana, but Inanna. and
Perfect.
Later, Inanna kind of either became, or like the idea of her just kind of melted together with Ishtar. So like, yeah, I mean, it's a couple thousand years of history, you know, how things come together like that.
Sure.
But what's also significant, especially with understanding of the fact that there are the Gala, which are the priests and priestesses, they didn't rule, right? And so like Joseph's dream of ruling their brothers would have been like, that would have been kind of like a slap in the face. Like, you're going to be this religious like leader and also a political leader, which is why it's like it's more than just taking the place of the oldest son. Like, the fact that Joseph was supposed to rule, like it actually broke it actually broke social custom, because Joseph should have only been a religious leader. And that made his brothers mad, and you know, queer people often get thrown in pits.
Right, of course. Wow.
And there's a lot, like there's actually a lot in Joseph's story in Egypt that also affirms their femininity. I'm not as strong on that because somebody's already done the work. If you want to understand it, there's a book called, I want to say Jacob's wounds. We'll have to look it up and like comment it or something. But it's yeah, it's a pretty good, like it's insightful and interesting. But that would be a much better place to find out about the feminine connections of
Yeah,
Joseph in Egypt.
that's really,
Um,
really cool.
but what I think is like kind of more significant, because one, I'm the one that did the research and not somebody else, and so I want to claim it as more important.
Yeah, as you
Yeah,
should.
yeah, that's satire. Like their work was very important, because it's what actually got me onto this thread. But something that they didn't catch, I don't believe, was the fact that at the end of Joseph's life, and whenever people like are about to die in the Bible, normally they'll say like they grew old and they had this many kids and they like owned whatever. Like go read go read Solomon's like he just died narrative, and it talks about all of the wives and concubines and stuff. The end of Joseph's life is different.
Hmm.
It actually makes a literary connection to their mom, Rachel. And so there's a story earlier on, and to be okay. So first of all, content warning for the next couple minutes. Like this is a story of sexual assault, and it's in the Bible because there's a lot of sexual assault in the Bible. Um, there's a story of Rachel not being able to have kids, and so it,
Not you, Rachel Ward. Rachel from the Bible, queer in faith. Not you.
I,
Sorry.
um, yeah, so she can't have a child, and so she's like, here, have my servant and have a child with her, and then that child will be born on my knees. And so that's what Jacob does, is rapes the servant, and then she gets pregnant. Anyways, that's significant because of the fact that the child is born on her knees, and that is an ancient custom of becoming a parent, right? And it's actually used throughout the ancient Near East, so it's not just in the Bible, and it can in fact be used for the adopted mother or father. It doesn't actually matter. However, it's the exact same language about Rachel as it is about Joseph. And so it's making a literary connection. And so like the very last thing that it talks about with Joseph is the fact that they ended up being the adopted mother of their like great grandkids.
Hmm.
That's the end of Joseph's life, is becoming a mother. Like
Wow. We love to see it.
yeah, we love to see it. That's I
We
mean,
are
this
here all day long for this.
this person like literally was one of the highest people in a nation, and it's like at the end of their life they became a mother, and it's like that's not heteronormative or
No,
gender
not at
binary.
all. This makes me think of the book of Ruth in a lot of ways. I wrote a paper on Ruth being non-binary and queer. Even though she's in this like heteronormative marriage or whatever, that doesn't mean she's not queer or non-binary, or they're not, but in every sense of the word, like Ruth is subverting traditional feminine roles.
Mm-hmm.
And so this reminds me of what you were just talking about with Joseph, Kaylee. Ruth, at the very end of the narrative, it talks about Ruth being more valuable than 7 sons. Not the baby that she had, or that they had. I should say they, because we don't know Ruth's pronouns. Not the baby that they have, but that Ruth is more valuable than 7 sons, or likened to 7 sons.
Yeah.
if anybody's interested in reading that paper, I will send it to you. But this happens, it's happening more frequently in the Bible than I think people realize. This subversion of gender normativity that we've created here, you know, in America, in colonization, all those things. But yeah, that's a really cool story about Joseph that I've never heard before, and I want to learn all of the things. I want to read this. I can't wait for your article to drop.
Yeah, I mean, but something that we have to understand is like we tend to come to the scripture thinking that heteronormativity is the norm, and that's not necessarily accurate, especially within the ancient culture. Like just like I said, there was recognition of trans people in Sumeria. There's basically recognition of trans people throughout all ancient Near Eastern cultures. Unless we want to say that it was except we want to say the Hebrews didn't, that they would literally have been the only one, which doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So like we have to understand that queerness is actually kind of supposed to be the given, not heteronormativity, like, or the existence of queerness, I should say, because like honestly, still not a majority of the people are queer, but their existence is like just accepted. And we see this all throughout. We actually see this all throughout Jewish history of recognizing the fact that there is more than just a binary. There's the Persian Empire, which at one point in time was the occupying force of Israel. Like they had a third gender. Like it's all throughout the history. And really until we get to the Roman Empire, where there is actually still a recognition of more than just male and female, but there is starting to be it's almost like we get to a hyper patriarchal society with Rome,
Right.
and that's like part of the Pax Romana is like there's Caesar, there's the husband, there's the wife, there are slaves, and there's children. Like that was the Pax Romana. That's what Rome, like their peace was founded on, having that hierarchical structure. And the truth is Christianity became so married to Rome that it brought on that type of culture that saw male and female and like a family structure in that style. And it's just we lose so much of that because the two largest like splits of Christianity was the Roman Christianity and Greek Christianity, which was actually still Roman because Rome split and the emperor went to Constantinople, and that's where Greek Orthodox comes from. Like they're both technically Rome in foundation. So the only like strand of Christianity that existed outside of a Roman influence was Syriac Christianity, which moved into Persia and into India and then all the way up actually into China. But they just didn't write, like they didn't write as much. They aren't seen as being as important, but they occupied like these areas that also didn't have gender binaries. So like it's more like it's really more than likely that Christianity through the Syriac tradition, which is more closely connected to the to Jewish tradition in the first century than any of the other forms of Christianity, understood that that there was more than just two genders. Like that was just a given. But because of the influence of Rome and how they viewed men, especially, we missed that. Like we totally jumped on board with Rome, and that set us up to become the colonialistic Europe that we eventually became. And there were European cultures that recognized more than two genders, but they got suppressed because of Christianity and the Roman influence. So it's like the reason we don't have these stories is literally because Christianity and the Roman Empire married each other and became the forerunner of colonialism. And then now where we're at, where we have white supremacy because of a Eurocentric understanding that civilization peaked at the Enlightenment, and that everyone else that wasn't as civilized just wasn't as good. And it's so like it's really like this long story of erasure of the fact that gender expansive people have always existed.
Wow. Professor Kaylee, I mean, yeah, I'm just enthralled by this entire discussion because, I mean, I'm learning new things. Yeah, and Rachel says imperialism was in bed with, or, you know, with Roman Empire and Christianity. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts on, because what you were just talking about made me think of, somebody made the comment, I will read it. Ancient Romans considered women to be incomplete men. Do you have any thoughts on that? And I mean, in the context of this conversation, that about what Rachel commented on?
Yeah, we have two Rachels commenting mostly.
Two Rachels commenting.
But yeah, the Rome saw women basically as incomplete men, like is said, but like specifically they were less than men. And this is like this actually goes into I think connects a lot with like a lot of times people will point to Jesus, especially in Matthew 19, and the Mark parallel is Mark 14. I think. Don't quote me on that one. I know it's Matthew 19, where Jesus is talking about divorce and then quotes, good, Rachel has she, her pronouns. So I'll use she, her when I talk about you. So Jesus is talking about divorce and quotes Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, right? That,
we're correct, yeah.
Yeah. That made them male and female for this purpose. A man will leave his family and be joined to his wife. And people will point to that and be like, see, Jesus upholds a gender binary. And I mean, you can say that, but it's not good scholarship because, I mean, we already talked about what you learned on day 1 of biblical interpretation class, which is be consistent. But day 2 is essentially your application can't be outside of the understanding of the text itself. So like you have to ask the question, what is actually being discussed? And it's, first of all, it's divorce. Like there was a practice of, especially within Jewish culture, and I know that there's actually a lot of work showing that within Roman culture as a whole, that there are places where women were able to could have a divorce and be the one to initiate it. That's not necessarily true in Jewish culture in the first century. Possibly in some more metropolitan areas, especially that are mixed with Greek culture, but still, we're talking about mostly people in a rural Jewish context, where basically men were able to divorce their wives for whatever reason. And so that's really what Jesus is talking about, is addressing this issue of divorce. So if we're going to make a gender binary off that, that's going outside of those lines, first of all, which is, it's bad. It's bad in biblical interpretation. You should have your hand slapped or whatever. But taking it further, and this one isn't in Mark, but Matthew continues it and has the response of the disciples. And the disciples are like, what's the point of even getting married if, because basically Jesus says that women are equal to men, but
mind blown. Yes.
Mind blown.
What?
Right?
What a concept.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so the disciples like, what's the point of getting married? And it like, that's such a misogynistic question. Like, what's the point of getting married if a woman has the same rights as me?
Right,
problematic, guys. These are guys. Starting the church, and they're which has no first century understanding. Like being a eunuch had nothing to do with celibacy. It literally had to do with having your genitals cut off. Mm-hmm. Some people are born without genitals. Some people are made to be eunuchs through whatever. But specifically, then he's saying people will become eunuchs for the kingdom of God. And that's significant because as a male in first century Rome, like, you're the one that holds the power. A eunuch was no longer seen as either male or female. So yeah, even within the quote binary in the first century, they still had a third gender that they didn't really talk about. Right. Because they saw eunuchs as a third gender. And like, you'll see people like go on, like, say, oh, the eunuch was still male even if he had his genitals cut off. And normally it's the eunuch in Acts that they're talking about. But like, sure, most likely that person did identify as male still. But what we are talking about is a first century understanding and how gender is upheld within the first century, and Jesus is holding the existence of a cultural understanding of a third gender, right, which means Jesus is actually upholding more than a gender binary. And not only that, Jesus is saying, hey, you men who are on the top with all this power, to be in the kingdom of God, you're actually going to have to remove yourself from that position of power. And that kind of made people a little upset. Yeah. It's I'm sure just like a side note, yeah, well, a lot. There's a reason why Jesus was killed. It's not because he was just some happy going guy. He literally pissed people off all over the place. Right. But a little side trail, eunuchs, people think of eunuchs as being celibate, that's how it got turned into. First century eunuchs were not celibate. Because they were seen as not male or female, they could have sex with either men or women and it would be fine. Right. They could That's literally have sex. They could literally have sex with a king's we'll say concubine or whatever, and it didn't necessarily matter because they couldn't impregnate a woman, so it wouldn't mess up genealogy or anything. But they could also have sex with the king because maybe he swings that way, Right. So wow. Not only is it a third gender, but it's a little gay. And we're okay with that. It's kind of gay in a good way.
Yay! We love that. Oh my gosh. This is great. I mean, I'm so glad we did this. And it's so informative and so helpful, and like it makes me feel better about the trauma I've endured because of the really awful teachings, exegesis and hermeneutics and traditions that I've been brought up in. And I think that's one of the reasons why I went to seminary. Maybe that's why you did as well, Kaylee and Chloe, was to because we wanted to know the truth about what the
Mm-hmm.
text is actually saying, you know, and is it everything that fundamentalist evangelical white evangelical teaching tells us? And the answer is clearly no. After this discussion, you know, and tons of scholarship that's out there, right? So what's the next step? We talk about like moving from affirmation to solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So basically, like now that we've learned this, like why does it actually matter for today? Yeah, it matters because I mean the three of us on here identify under the trans umbrella in some way because both of you are non-binary. I am a trans woman, like, and it's Trans Day of Visibility. Like that's why we're doing this. We are honestly facing a politics calling for our extermination.
Yep.
Like that's literally people are calling for that. And we have politicians that are literally trying to pass bills and laws to prevent children from getting the care that they need that is, yeah, it's life altering in a good way. Like sometimes we want positive life altering things. Like having the correct medical care is a life changer in a good way. But blocking that from children it's incredibly inhumane.
Right.
Like seriously, read the Bible. Like any person in the Bible that goes after children, bad things happen. There's two really good examples. Like don't do it. But that's where we're at, right? That currently politicians are targeting trans kids.
Yeah.
Because it's easy. Honestly, they can spin a narrative saying that it's protecting children. They can use all of this like grotesque imagery to talk about mutilation of children's genitals, because that's something a politician should be thinking about, is children's genitals.
Right.
And gender affirming surgeries aren't mutilation. Like it's just not. You don't say that about any other. You don't say that about any other medical care going on. Like it's literally just language used to spread fear and hate.
Absolutely.
And honestly, speak to a trans person about like caring for children, because honestly, we want kids to like be able to be themselves without any influence. Like trans people aren't influencing your kids past telling them, hey, it's okay to be yourself.
Right.
And if you're worried about that being the influence on your children, then I don't know, shit, you shouldn't have had kids. I mean,
that's a great point.
But policy is going to continue, and it's going to continue against trans adults. It's going to continue. It's starting to shift towards insurance providers. Mm-hmm. So now, so some areas trans people won't get any kind of care. So like all this stuff is going on, and unfortunately, at least my experience. So I'm going to only talk from my experience on this one. Churches, especially, have a tendency to be open and affirming. They will welcome you in. They will let you preach. They will let you be their pastor even. But whenever it comes time to show up, to step out on the state capitol steps, to speak out, to say, no, this is not okay, they're not there. And that's a problem.
Right.
It's time for people to actually put what they're saying into action. Like this passive affirmation of queer people is not enough. That is going to get queer people killed. It's time for the church, it's time for organizations, anyone who actually says that they care about queer people, care about trans rights, care about protecting children, to actually step up, show up, and speak out along with us. Because honestly, if we're letting just trans people speak out, we're going to lose. We don't have the numbers. Honestly, we're facing like some of the worst like things spoken against us out of any demographic out there. Like sometimes we need a rest. Like
Yeah.
I could really use an ally to step up and take this one for me for a little bit, because I could really just could use a nap. So that's why,
Yes.
like, especially for us at Center for Prophetic Imagination, a big push for us this year is to help organizations like move towards solidarity. And there's like some really easy ways that especially churches can do this. Like you already have all kinds of teams and stuff. Like just find a group of people that care about this and are able to stay on top of local legislation. Like
Right.
these conversations are going on in school boards, are going on at the state level, on the city level. Be on top of it and have a group that's able to show up. Because honestly, a lot of these are being discussed like night before notice. And I've shown up for some of them, and I've had to not be at some of them, because honestly, you find out on a Tuesday night that they're going to be discussing anti-trans bills in the morning at 9 o'clock, and like you have a job and a family, and
Yeah.
like it's not easy to show up. So like that's why we need allies to actually stand in solidarity. Yeah, it's really like unfortunate to drive downtown and find parking and show up and be there and speak out, and honestly probably have politicians like not listen to you. They're probably going to glaze over, but we need you to show up. We need the numbers. Like,
Yeah.
we need
True.
you.
Yeah. I think, yes, to everything you said, a resounding yes. And also I feel like we're at a time and place. I mean, I have a lot of criticisms about the church in general.
Oh yeah.
Probably why I don't go to church anymore for now. For now, I don't. But I feel like pastors and leadership and in churches should spend less time on their sermons and more time away from their pulpits. Get out there with us. Go out there with your congregations and do this work with us, alongside us. The sermon can wait,
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't seem as vitally important anymore, right?
No.
I don't know. There's bigger fish to fry out in the world.
All
than
of your
writing
sermons have been recorded for the last like couple years.
Yeah.
Just play a recording of one of them and show up at a protest. Like it'll be okay.
Exactly. We did
Yeah.
get a question in just this last minute. What is a good starting point in talking to non-affirming people about how the Bible affirms trans people and trans identities? Is there a good general resource, do you think, Kaylee, for folks?
So Austin Harkey's book is actually good, like a beginning like read. And I'm not 100% sure that I said his name right. I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure you did.
Okay.
Austin Harkey.
But honestly, my biggest advice whenever people ask me like, how do I talk to my like non-affirming family, non-affirming church members, is evaluate the situation and recognize that it might not be worth going into that conversation, first of all, because there is, don't worry, I will give you like advice if you think it's worth going into it, but I'm going to give this advice first. More than likely, you will spend a lot of time, put in a lot of hope, and do your best to have a conversation that will end with people ignoring you at best, uh, completely cutting you off, maybe disowning you from a family at worst. Like, a lot of people don't want to be affirming. Um, and recognizing that those people might not be the people that you need to put your energy in, and that you might, honestly, you might just need to live your life and be happy until they are ready to have that discussion. So that's like my precursor of just like, be aware, take care of yourself. But if it does seem like an opportunity that you can start with, I mean, I honestly would start to ask them questions. First of all, like, where did they, like, where does their understanding of gender binary come from? I mean, a lot of it is just, it's so baked in that we didn't even think about it. Like, one of the reasons it took me over 30 years to figure out I was trans was because I didn't even know trans existed until like my late 20s.
Yeah.
Like, for me, the language I had was, there's gay people and not gay people. And if you're gay, then you're an evil person. And I was like, I'm not evil. I need to not be gay. And that's not an accurate framework for humanity. And so, like, just asking those questions, having them like think through some of their presuppositions and recognize that a lot of it is just given to them without actually like having thought about it, is a good way. And then you can talk about some of these things that we talked about today, where like there are affirming aspects of scripture, and especially talk about Genesis and how there is no fixed category at all in Genesis 1.
Yeah. And you mentioned Austin Harkey's book called Transforming, which is a great book, I think. And Kaylee, you recommended it too. As I think of it as kind of a primer, to a lot of these discussions. But yeah, excellent. So we're a little bit over time. Wow, this was incredible. And we didn't get that many questions, but that's okay. Hopefully everybody was their mind was just blown by the expertise of Kaylee, and her wisdom. So this was great. We should definitely do something like this again, I feel like.
It was. This has been a lot of fun. Like, I look forward to partnering with REAP every time I'm able to, whether it's through our two organizations or being a plaintiff on the lawsuit. So I love it. This experience has been so amazing, and we obviously love you, Kaylee, and support you and are just in love with your work and want to be alongside you in the work that you do. So thanks. Where can people find you, Kaylee? Well, everyone that's on this should have already followed Center for Perfect Imagination, and that is essentially where I am publicly working. I'm the one running the social media on that. So if you see me posting, if you see posts from us, like that's me. We're a staff of 2 people, me and another trans woman. Her name is Ash. She does. So we also offer an entire 2-year certificate program for people who want to become spiritual directors in whatever capacity. And going through that program, it's a 2-year program. You'll look at a lot of ways that spirituality should overlap with social justice, because that's kind of our main thing, is understanding that like the way that we view scripture is very subversive of the empire, and to develop a spirituality that seeks liberation and seeks social justice is important to us. And so that's basically what it is. It's a 2-year certificate program on how to be a spiritual director and do social transformation.
That's so cool.
So if anybody's interested in that, I think there's a few links on our Instagram. Our link tree is on our Instagram. You can go to our website and stuff. Yeah, we have Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So find us there. Reach out. If you have questions, just DM us. I'm pretty good at answering DMs there, but sometimes my notifications get messed up, and so
that's okay. It happens to all of us, Kaylee. That's all right. And yeah. Chloe and I are at REAP_LGBTQ. We protect queer, trans, and non-binary students at non-affirming faith-based colleges and universities that all 3 of us have been to. So we have the lived experience of what that's like. If you need assistance, just let us know. So, okay, this has been amazing. Happy Trans Day of Visibility. And thank you for everybody who joined us and engaged, and we had a steady group of people watching the entire time.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, so that was cool. So thank you all.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Okay, see you later.
Bye.
Bye.